Good evening. It's a pleasure to speak this evening about this wonderful moving book by Edith Bruck, Pane perduto in Italian, Lost Bread in English. And we have here the translators, Gabriella Romani, who will speak in a moment, and David Yanoff. Gabriella Romani is a professor at Seton Hall, where she also directs the Charles and John Alberto Italian Studies Institute. She wrote many books about, in particular, the Italian literature between 19th and 20th century. She is currently working on a monograph on 19th century Jewish writers in Italy, and she translated into English the works of Edith Bruck and Enrico Castelnuovo. And I'd like, before leaving the floor to Gabriella, who will introduce Edith Bruck, I'd like to just to listen to Edith Bruck for 5 minutes. She has been interviewed by another friend of the Institute, Alain Elkan, about this book, this very book, The Lost Bread. And I think we can launch the short interview.
Edith Bruck is with us today. She is a very well-known writer. She is one of the participants to the very important Italian award, Premio Strega, and just published in the collection Oceani for the publisher La Nave di Teseo, a new book whose title is Il pane perduto. Il pane perduto is not a novel. It is a kind of a diary, or what the French will call a récit, about your life, your early life. I mean, when you were taken from your native village in Hungary, you're taken suddenly with your whole family to Auschwitz. And here the book starts, and then you tell all your life until later on you come to live in Italy, where you end by marrying the poet and cinema director Nello Risi, right?
Yes.
So how would you describe this book, Il pane perduto, The Lost Bread?
I don't know. I try to write again, because I wrote a lot of books about Auschwitz and about today and yesterday and tomorrow. I had a moment that I lost my memory, but only one moment exactly. I didn't know what is computer. And I asked the woman who was living with me how to write. And I had a kind of a panic. I was afraid that I lost my memory. And without memory, I cannot live, absolutely. For me, it's dying. And I started to write a new book immediately because I was afraid that I lost my memory. And I tried to write, and I wrote on the end. I like flying all my life, from the childhood till today.
It's like a memoir in a way, or an autobiography somehow,
yeah,
right?
But not only memoir. I think it's also the story, history, not only autobiography. And all the time they said it's not like that, because it doesn't regard the story and the humanity, what happened. Not only me. I write from yesterday, for today, and for tomorrow.
To start writing with the chapter La Bambina Scalza. The Bambina Scalza is you. You are in a small village in Hungary. You were born in a Jewish family. Your parents were quite poor.
Very poor.
And as the war was almost finished, right, in 1944, your father didn't think that Hitler and the Nazis will touch the Jews, right? Because until then, they had not been persecuted, the Hungarian Jews. I mean,
yes, they persecuted the Hungarian Jews. Also before, from 1942, they started to be very anti-Semitic in the village, and the fascist propaganda. They, some way, it was like poison for the people. And we suffered enough till 44, the last 2 years. And my father was in the army, and they sent him home, and they said we didn't have with a new Jew in the army, and they sent him at home. And he was very depressed someday because he understood that something is finished, something happened, very, very tragic. He was very preoccupied. And we had a very difficult life in the last 42 till 44.
You were very poor, you had no much food, and the reason why you called the book Il pane perduto, which means the lost bread, is because in the moment just before the Nazi came into your house, your mother was baking bread, no? She was doing...
Yes.
Tell the story yourself, and what happened?
What happened that my mother made the bread, the nagbar gave us the flour, and she gave us for the bread after the last day of the Pesach, and my mother made the bread, and in the morning at 5, they put down almost the door, and came the gendarmes, Hungarian gendarmes and fascists, and they try, and it was terrible in the morning. And my mother started to cry for the bread, the lost bread, the bread. I think that she, for the horror, she put all her pain and the horror in the bread, because we had to last the bread in at home. It was always ready to put in the oven. And she was crying for the bread because for her and for us, it was very important, the bread, first of all. But I think the second is she put all her pain in the bread. We lost the bread. And all the time from the village to the ghetto, and from the ghetto to Auschwitz, she was crying all the time for the bread. But I think it was not the bread. It was everything together. And the horror, I think. And we don't know where we go. We don't know what is our destiny, absolutely. And she cried all the time for the bread. And so for this reason, I titled the book, The Lost Bread.
Just this interview let us imagine the powerful density of this book, the capacity, the poetic capacity of evoking terrible things with a simple aspect of everyday life. And now, hoping that the computer is working better, I would like to invite Gabriella Romani here to introduce with a PowerPoint the work and the life of Edith Bruck. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to this presentation. It was actually quite touching to hear the voice of Edith Bruck. And let me say, she has never lived in an English country, in an English-speaking country. She learned English as she was working in Israel in 1947, 1948, and maybe in some of her travels. So it's quite impressive, her command of the language. I'd like to start, though, first of all, thanking Fabio Finotti, the director of the Italian Cultural Institute, for inviting me to make this presentation. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm going to give a general introduction of who Edith Bruck is. I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with her story. And so I'm just going to give some biographical and context to then the conversation that we're going to have. There are a lot of aspects of her writing that I'd like to discuss and explain a little better. So I translated this book, Lost Bread. This is the original, Il pane perduto. And let me go on. Okay. So this is Edith with a copy of the book, and it came out last summer. This is in her house. She was particularly happy with the cover because it's a picture of her with her mother. Pane perduto, the title itself, Lost Bread, really brings up a lot of the memory with her mother. and the relationship that she had. Very difficult relationship, but very, very close relationship at the same time. Here is Edith in a picture. Edith was born on May 3rd in 1931 in a small town, in a small village in the northeast section of Hungary, near Slovakia and Ukraine, in a small town of about 5,000 people named Titsa Bersel. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. She was one of 6 children in a rural area and an impoverished family. Her father traded like meat. He would sell farmers' meat in different towns and got a commission, but it was never really enough to feed the 6 families. You see the picture below to the left. It's with her 2 brothers and her sister. This is the picture of the family members who were deported because they were all in the house when they were taken. And to the right is another picture with the mother and the sister. 2 of the sisters had left the house. They were older and lived in bigger city. I think one was in Budapest and another one in another city, where they were learning how to become seamstress. And they were able to hide and were not deported. So here, just to give you a sense, on April 1944, she mentioned in the interview, that was like 2 days after Passover, the family had given, some neighbors had given the mother some flowers and made bread. And in the morning, actually not Nazis, but Hungarian fascists came to deport the whole family. First, they were sent to the ghetto of the main cities of the region and then deported to Auschwitz. The mother was sent immediately into the crematorium. The father and the brother were sent to Dachau, and she and her sister managed to always stay together. And they were first deported to, from Auschwitz to Kristianstad, Dachau, and then Bergen-Belsen, where they were liberated in April 1945 by the American army, by the American forces. It's hard maybe to see, I don't have like one of those laser pens, but they went from Auschwitz, that you can see is in Poland, and they ended up marching all the way to Bergen-Belsen. Edith was 13 at the time she was deported. Her sister was 18. And she still today says that she owes to her sister as she survived, and the sister and her maternal role with her. After liberation in 1945, she went back to Hungary. So the book, as Alan Elkin explained, starts from her still in the village, deported, and then she gets to Italy. So there is a whole parable of her life from child to adult, and talks about when she goes back. It's also goes back to Hungary after she is liberated from Bergen-Belsen. It's very interesting, the refugee story after the war, how it took a long time to get home. If you read Primo Levi as well, and La Tregua, Truce, where he narrates the difficulties. It's not like you can get on a train and just go home to your destination. Levi took him 9 months to get back to Turin from Auschwitz. Edith and her sister go back to Hungary. They look for their sisters, and they describe that in the book, and find them, and then eventually go back to their little town, to their little village, realizing that the house has been ransacked. Some of the pictures that you saw that I upload on the slide were found in the mud on the ground. The things were gone. And both she and her sister didn't feel they fit anymore. They didn't belong anymore. They didn't feel that was a life they wanted to go back to. So it took some more migration and moving around. She lived in Czechoslovakia for a couple of years and then eventually went to Israel, decided that that was not a place for her either. She had to do military service. She didn't want to wear a uniform. She did not want to use firearms after her experience in the concentration camps. Here, so she goes back to, she moves to Israel in 1948, and then eventually in 1954, she goes to Italy. The stories there is also not clear to me completely, but initially, well, the initial motive was that she had a sister in Argentina and she wanted to join her, and she started working in a dance troupe to gain some money that took her to Europe, ended up in Naples first and then in Rome, loved it, never left. She's lived in Rome since 1954. And we can talk about that later, how she experiences the Italy of the 1950s, also a very poor country right after the war, and Rome in particular. But here I thought I would share some pictures of, so she went back 3 times to her village after she after she left the concentration camps. The first time right afterwards. And then she went back in 1962 with her husband, Nello Risi, who, I'll say a little more, it's a poet and the brother of Dino Risi. And then she went back in 1982 because a Hungarian documentarian made a movie. There was a state-funded film made on her. As you can see, it was extremely emotional and difficult. After that, the house was destroyed. It was already in very bad conditions, and she decided that she would never go back. My understanding is that last summer, the mayor of her town of origin put a plaque in the school where she went, as reminding people of the story of Edith Bruck. Here we go. So in 1954, Edith Bruck moves to Rome, decides, with a dance, and decided to settle in Rome, where she still lives today. 1958, she married Nello Risi, who's a poet who passed away recently. And in 1959, she published her first book. This is not the cover of the first book. This is a reprint that came later. And it's been translated into English. Who loves you like this? Basically, in 4 years, she learned Italian well enough to write it. It's quite remarkable, her command of Italian. And at the same time, it's quite remarkable the way she writes, because she doesn't write like an Italian writer. And she doesn't write like someone who's been schooled in Italian and went to university. Also, let's keep in mind that she went to school until 6th grade. When she was 13, she left school. She never went back to school. And she always worked after that. But she says that since she was a child, she felt she wanted to write poetry. She felt driven to write. So when she came to Italy, not only she felt being driven to write literature, but also to bear testimony, to bear witness to what happened, which is, I think, not always the case. You have a lot of survivors who cannot talk about it for years, even with their own family members. But there are others like Primo Levi, he wrote about it, that they felt this compulsion to write and tell others. Edith had published in Italy more than 20 volumes between poetry and poems. One of her, this is a collection of short stories, which is fabulous, Andremo in città from 1962. And they made a movie out of it, and with Geraldine Chaplin featured in the film. And here are some covers of the books. Letter to My Mother, that's the first book of hers that I translated in 2007, came out in 1988, the year after Primo Levi died. And I think it's a testament to Levi's memory as her intellectual father. And also here, I just added to the right, this is her very, very last book that came out 2 days ago in Italy, I frutti della memoria. It's a collection of letters, students' letters, that were sent to her over the years. Edith, besides writing, has been writing about her experience as a survivor of the Holocaust, has always visited schools, high schools, and I think mainly high schools, talking to students, she feels that's an obligation that she has, and trying to find new generations that can understand the story and then bring the story to other people. I've just learned talking to her about this last book that there are some students who have become ambassadors and go to other schools for her and tell her story, which I think is very important also in the sense of why she writes her books. Why writing literature? And I think this is something that we're going to talk about, the power of literature and the way that creates some kind of moral imagination in the readers. This is a picture of Levi, Primo Levi and Edith Bruck. They were very close friends. They wrote each other's work. Primo Levi was from Turin. She lived in Rome all her life. And she has some funny stories. So at the end of the book here, you'll find an interview with her that I did. And I asked her, when she met Levi the first time. And she has a funny story because she said that according to Levi, the first time they met in Turin, she brought him a rose. And she goes, "Are you crazy? You brought me a rose when we met the first time." So there is but there is a rose involved in their meeting, apparently. One of the two brought the rose. Also, it's interesting the way that she describes him. Whenever he was in Rome, she would invite him for lunch, and they would sit at the table, she, her husband, Nello Risi, he with his wife. And she said, you could tell immediately, we didn't talk about it, but Nello and Primo Levi's wife would leave stuff on the plate. She and Primo Levi would clear everything. The bones were completely cleared of meat, and they didn't even have to talk. They just looked at each other and they understood. And I think there was this bond between them, that there was something they understood of each other's that nobody else could. This is Il pane perduto, came out in 2021. It's been translated in several languages. Interesting, so here I just upload the French, Le pain perdu, which is the same cover, and then there's an English one, and below is the Hebrew. This is the first book of Edith Bruck being translated into Hebrew. I think is important. And for this book, she was a finalist for the very prestigious Italian literary prize, Il Premio Strega. She was one of 5 finalists, and I checked, actually, she got the second. No, she was second in the highest number of votes. She didn't make it for, second. Second, I checked yesterday, yeah. And she won the Premio Strega Giovane, which is also very interesting because she has not really gotten into the canon, the literary canon, but she's read in schools. And students, and the Premio Strega Giovane is like the Pulitzer, but given by high school students as they vote. And they really liked the book, evidently, since she got the highest votes. 2021 was also a very special year for Edith. Pope Francis made a surprise visit to her home on February 20th. So this is as the apocryphal story goes. The book came out. A journalist from the Osservatore Romano, which is the Vatican news daily, interviewed her, asking her about the book. The Pope read the article, was intrigued, and decided that he wanted to meet her. So the secretary said, okay, we'll have her come here. And he said, no, I'm going to her home. I want to visit her. So he went into his little Fiat on the passenger seat with the driver driving in the street of Rome. He stops in front of the building. We all live, in Italy, people live in apartment buildings. And stopped there, rang the bell. He said, who's there? It's the Pope. It's Pope Francis. They're coming up. So the picture that you see to the left is when she opened the door and Pope Francis came in. They spoke for about a couple of hours. Then he invited her. This is a second visit. She brought Halla, and she brought this little book that she wrote after the meeting, Io sono Francesco, because that's what he said when he rang the bell. I am Francesco. It's Francesco in English, I guess it would be. And there's a real bond of friendship, I think, and mutual admiration between them. I think they talk regularly. He calls her on her birthday, and so on. All right, so why did I translate Edith Bruck? I learned about Edith Bruck's work on a graduate school, on a graduate course many years ago at the University of Pennsylvania when I was a graduate student, and I took a course on Holocaust literature. We read some of her work. I really, really loved it. I got her, I knew that she was from Rome. I got her phone number, got in touch with her, met her, and we've been friends ever since. We've known each other for 20 years. Here are some pictures with also my daughter over the years when we met her. I'm ready to sit down and maybe talk. There are a few questions that I really care about talking.
Okay.
All right. That's good. Yeah. Works. Okay.
I love the way this book begins. Long, long ago lived a girl who, under the spring sun, with blonde braids bouncing, would walk barefoot in the warm dust. It's like the beginning of a fairy tale.
Mhm.
Long, long ago. And then the book ends with a letter to God, which is why the Osservatore Romano made an interview, a wonderful letter to God, where she writes, I write to you, elementary thoughts, small ones, belonging to the child who is still in me. They did not grow up or grow old with me. They did not even change much. So there is this theme of a childhood, which is, of course, linked also to the relation with the mother. It's at the center of the poetic strength of the book. Can you tell us something about this poetic but also biographic theme?
I also want to read the epigraph at the beginning of the book because I think it's very well
Was
connected.
the second question.
Okay, well, I'm not jumping to the second question, but I think here it's really, it captures something. It's written by a poet, Nello Risi, who happens also to be her husband. And he says, true history, the one nobody studies, today a nuisance to most, that made infinite mourners at one stroke took your childhood away. And I think that the theme of the lost bread and childhood being taken away and her creative force is still so alive. Let me remind people, she's going to be 93 in May. And she has double my mental and physical energy. She has such a creative force still alive. And I think it's that child that through literature, through artistic endeavor, she's trying to keep alive. And it's interesting because it's not just bearing witness. And I think this is important to remember maybe, that Primo Levi, when he tried to publish If This Is a Man, could not publish it, as we all know. When he published it with Einaudi, finally, it was not in narrative. It was in memoirs, in like a document. It was only later that came into the series as a narrative. Edith Bruck sees herself as an artist, as a writer. And it's through literature that she believes her bearing witness makes most sense. And it's through literature that she keeps that child alive. And when I say this, is because when you write a memoir, you're looking at the past. When you write in literature, in the way that she's writing literature to bear witness, you're looking at the future. You are creating some sort of, it's not my term, I wish it was, Martha Nussbaum said, but it's moral imagination. How do you create empathy? Literature plays a big role. And so we love, by the way, I just want to acknowledge that David Yanoff, the co-translator, is also here with us, sitting in the front row. And maybe if there are going to be some issues, questions about the translation, we can involve him too, if he wants to. But so that is the way I see it, that the child is connected to her creative force. She has not allowed the deportation and concentration camp experience to kill that child. We did another presentation last night, and a very smart person read The Lost Bread as her lost childhood. And David said, I don't think so. That's actually quite the opposite. She saved her life. She created a life for herself in Italy that saved that child through the language. And we'll talk about that, I guess.
Yes, the language, because it's true that it looks convenient to write in Italian because you live in Italy, because she was in Italy. By the way, doing many other things, modeling, for instance, not only writing. But it's true also that when she speaks about her choice of language, she says that Italian is a sort of defense, of way of defending her from the shock that Hungarian is still giving her, from the pain of her own language. So Italian creates a sort of a defense, of distance. And I would like very much you to speak about this complex relation, but also the difficulty of translating someone who is already translating herself, because you are translating a language which is already in a way a sort of language of translation, or novel in translation.
Yeah, I guess when she writes in Italian, first of all, she's always written sitting down on a couch and with a pen and paper. And then after writing on paper, she would write on a typewriter when she was younger. Now she has someone who does it for her on the computer. I don't think she thinks in Hungarian and write. In fact, she thinks in Italian when she writes, because she has made an effort, a committed effort, to live Hungarian in Hungary. In that, she still speaks. I know she's been invited many times, but the Hungarian embassy on events and so on, she still speaks Hungarian fluently. But when she writes for this, and she talks about it in the interview, for her to say bread in Hungarian, it means to remember what happened to her mother. When she says bread in Italian, it's like I go to the bakery to buy some nice bread. It does not have that emotional reaction that brings the trauma back. So she defines Italian as the language, as her kind of a new country. It's not Italy as a place, but it's the language that has given her a place that she considers hers. Because also that's this thing, I think, as a child and as a young adult, she had no choices. She was poor, then she was deported. As an adult, she decided at one point, and she talks about it in the book, she wanted to become the main agent of her own life, and she did. It was also interesting that when she arrives in Rome, she doesn't know any Italian at all, zero. She's never heard Italian. She's never met any Italians. And after 4 years, she starts writing her first book in Italian, which is a remarkable accomplishment. I've been in this country 30 years. I could never write a novel in Italian. Clearly, the artistic self she has, it's not here. But what is interesting, though, is that the reviews that came out, there is, and also this, I think it might something that I've been thinking about. She's never really made it into the canon of Italian literature. She's not as much studied at university. She's not in, and she's always been looked as a writer of Hungarian origin. She has been known in schools, but when she was, there is this divide. There's the academic world that don't really consider too much, and then there is the cultural world instead, from the very beginning really embraced her. If you read the reviews that came out in the 50s and 60s after her first books came out, she's presented as the Anne Frank who survived. So people would write, where Anne Frank dropped the pen, she picked it up. She was seen as the young Eastern European young girl who was victimized by the Nazi persecutions, but she made it. So there was always this kind of optimistic element that they saw in her life and in her writings that have always been very appealing. And if you read, and she'll tell you herself, for her it's very important. This looks at the future, does not look at the past. This is done in a way that she writes in a way that she wants to transmit the hope that somehow humanity is going to be saved by these horrible acts that happen in the world. And in particular, the one that she was defined by. So the language is extremely important, much more than the country. When we translate it, and I don't know if David wants to say something about it, but we try to stay as close as possible to the original. She writes in a more simplistic way, let's say in Italian, than the typical Italian writer who went to Italian schools, university. The Italian tend to be very Baroque, a lot of dependent clauses. She has more of almost like an English syntax, much more direct. So in that sense, it was not difficult to render in English, but we wanted to keep alive the voice as well, to keep that sense of choice of finding a place in the language. The language is very important to her, and we tried as much as possible to keep it close to the natural voice, but at the same time, make it fluent and natural for an English-speaking reader, of course. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think the voice, especially after the tone, the first part is really written like a fable, but it's a fable of ordinary life before the people of David. So the voice, the tone, and the pacing. The book, as Edith wrote it, it is written in a simple narrative style. It has poetic elements, and it has great pacing. It really moves the way that she has always really moved. The book is really a reflection of her in that way. So those were some of the things we really had to be very careful to capture, the tone and the pacing.
It's kind of like a picaresque. It's a picaresque adventure from the moment she was in a little village to the moment that then she goes to Italy.
And there is this image, very strong, very different from her, of the mother in the book, which is really at the center, in a way, of the imagination. Can you speak about her?
Her mother was very religious, unlike her father, who was not. And she had, like often girls do, a very conflict relationship with her mother. Felt very close to her, but at the same time felt suffocated by her, who dictated choices that she didn't quite agree as a child. She was forced to do things that she didn't always wanted to do. But her bond with her mother is at the center of her creative voice. A Letter to My Mother, the other book that I translated, is really based on her relationship and trying to figure out how to compensate the loss of her mother in her life. It's a very big presence that it's not there anymore. And as I said, when the book, that cover came out, she cried for 10 minutes just looking at the cover. But she also elaborates on how you as an individual with a destiny of surviving, in her case, what do you owe to those who came before? What do you owe to those who gave you life, in this case, the mother? And what do you owe to yourself as an individual who makes certain choices? And I think that's why I find her work really interested. She puts together the tragedy of the Holocaust, but also a lot of philosophical questions of, who are you when these things happen? How do you explain to yourself, first of all, that she survived and others didn't, of course, and this is a big question that any survivors, like also Primo Levi, but also in a relationship with the parents. So Letter to My Mother, which she does in here, but it's divided in two parts, one part to her father and the other one to her mother, and the other one devoted to the father figure, which is also very, very interesting.
Even the image, the idea of God goes through, in a way, the relation with the mother, because the mother represents the faith. For her, God is absence. And there is really a moving passage in the letter to God. I questioned you on many things, but never heard your voice like Moses. You never deigned me a single answer, never deigned to answer my mother, who had absolute faith in you, the opposite of me, full of doubts. So the idea of the mother is also the idea of someone that is always there to create a difference, but also a way or a connection. There is also a reality which goes beyond the family. For instance, when she arrives to Italy, she describes Italy. And it's very interesting for us because it's the Italy of the 50s. Can you speak a bit about this part of the book?
So she arrives in Italy in Rome, first in Naples, and really reading is kind of like a postcard type of description of a foreigner who arrives in Naples, a sunny city. People are welcoming, warm. She was coming from Switzerland, which she didn't like. She thought people were very cold, distant. Yeah, and in Naples, there are people singing. I mean, really some of the stereotypes that you think of the Neapolitans, singing, happy, warm, embracing. But the way that she also puts it is that there was something very basic. Italy was still a poor country where people was trying to come out of years of suffering, of distraction. And she felt she was in the same place. She felt that there was a lot in common. And it was a great place to stay. And she decided to stay. When she arrived in Rome, she did all kinds of jobs. She worked for a beauty salon because she spoke languages. And that was in the center of the city. She modeled. She was extras in movies. She did all kinds of jobs, and then she started working for Rai. She also, throughout her career, she worked as a director. She made documentaries. She worked as a journalist. And she worked a lot on the language, trying to improve her Italian and continue to write. I want to insist that her writing books about the Holocaust, it's not just to write about her experience of the Holocaust, but it responds to two main needs. One is to communicate what happened and make sure that people receive that message. And to do that, she writes book. She had written 20 volumes on the same topic, basically. But if you read each one of them, it's very, very different. She uses different names, for example, for family members. She concentrates on certain details rather than others. For example, here she didn't talk much about the experience in Czechoslovakia. The one before she did more. There are strategies, literary strategies, to communicate a world that she thinks should not be forgotten, an experience that should not be forgotten, and that she believes with her creative force, with literature, she can communicate and create empathy that she considers the main ingredients of humanity. She feels very strongly about this.
And it's interesting also that when she arrives to Italy, she discovers that there is a complex relation between her and the Roman Jewish community.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so she's an Ashkenazi Jew, of course, from Eastern Europe. The family spoke Yiddish, the father and the mother, but she understood it, but she didn't really speak it. They spoke Hungarian with the children. When she arrives in Rome, yes, she goes to the synagogue, and Rome is Levantine and Sephardic and Italian mainly. She has obviously had relationships. She decided after the attacks in 1972 to be registered with the Jewish community of Rome, but she's always had a problematic relationship. Also, the Jewish community of Rome tends to be quite conservative. She's very progressive, and that also over the years has. But apparently now, actually, things are much easier.
Even if she underline the fact that when the chief rabbi goes to visit her, ask her if she is registered, as if he didn't know. So it's interesting because it's a completely different tradition from the tradition of Levi, who writes that when he arrived to the concentration camps, they didn't think that he was really Jewish because he didn't know Yiddish. So there is a difference also in style between Levi and Bruck.
Style and history, personal history, and she talks a lot about that. Primo Levi was from Turin, and people from Turin are known as being quite reserved. And she says she feels very Roman, much more extroverted, warmer in her approach to others. Primo Levi arrived in Auschwitz as a man with a university degree from the middle class, an Italian middle class man, with a clear understanding of who he was in life. She was a young girl of 13 from an impoverished family, from a rural area. She was not even, she was saying how for her it was much easier, in fact, to deal with the adversities and the difficulties of the concentration camp compared to middle class women, young women who got there and they psychologically cannot sustain the adversities of the concentration camp. But she was much more used to that. She did not feel deeply offended in the way that Levi felt deeply offended as a human being, the way that he was treated there. Primo Levi also had a place to go home to. You cannot. Can you hear me with How about this? Yes? Can you hear me? No. Okay, so we put this down. Okay. Yes, this works, definitely. Okay. Primo Levi had a place to go. I mean, Primo Levi had a home to return to. Edith did not. Primo Levi was a chemist by training who, when he came back and also had this urge to bear witness, decided to become a writer. And he combined his scientific and literary voices in the beautiful books, in the wonderful, insightful, deeply literary works that he has written. Edith Bruck stopped going to school at age 13, not get any more training, began writing in an Italian in a different language, an Italian language as an adult. Clearly, her prose is more simple in the ways presented, but not certainly in the ideas that are presented. They admired each other's writing. They talked a lot about the role of the survivor. When he died, committed suicide in 1987, she felt very much betrayed as a survivor. And I think that he didn't believe anymore in the force of literature as a savior of humanity. Edith still does today. I think she never gave up on that. And I think because she's never gave up on the child that she tried to preserve all her life. That's how I see it. Primo Levi was perhaps too conscious, too aware of the loss for his own good. Edith Bruck decided to change her focus, not on what happened, but what can be done for the future. It's also, I think, very different personalities, very different ways of approaching the commitment to writing about it.
I think that maybe there are some questions. Yes.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I am very, very curious to know what is your personal opinion about how her books translated into English resonated inside the American community of readers in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, she's not well known in the United States, and I don't understand why. I tried to contribute. I thought, when the book in Italian came out, I was at a conference with a colleague from Dartmouth, and she said, Gabriella, this book needs to be translated into English. I said, okay, we'll do it. And I strongly believe that there is a potential readership in this country, but somehow she's not very well known. So please spread the word.
It's also a very small publisher.
Yeah, that too.
So therefore, it's not reviewed and made in the New York Times book review. It has limited, the distribution has limited.
Yeah, that's part of it. But I also think that sometimes it's serendipitous. She's very well known in France. In Italy today, especially after the visit of Pope Francis, she's a kind of a celebrity. Everybody wants a piece of her. Anything happens, she got interviews and so on. And she's now working on a book of poetry. She's also a poet. I strongly recommend you look at a poet. She's a wonderful poet, in fact. And I think that her main voice is a poetic voice that comes out even in her prose.
Yes.
So Israel, this is the first book that got translated into Hebrew. I think she's had a complicated relationship with Israel because she left. She left because she didn't want to be in the military. And in the 70s with Primo Levi, they wrote a letter after what happened in Lebanon. And she's very progressive, but she's also very clear on her Jewish roots and the importance of speaking also as a Jewish woman.
I'd like to know what she thinks of the current events that have occurred as of October 7th. Most Holocaust survivors say never again, and never again is happening again.
Yeah, I think she was traumatized like anybody else. I haven't talked to her a lot about this, also because unfortunately she had an accident in October. She broke her leg and she was in bed for 2 months. And now she's on a wheelchair. She has not been able to walk since October when she had the accident. So she's been in a lot of pain. I think she's very aware and very worried also for the rise of anti-Semitism all over Europe, of course.
Yes, there is, I think, some line, if I am able to find them, because all the can I?
Yeah. Dall'intervista o dal...
I think that at the end of the letter to God is very clear, because she speaks about the questions usually university classrooms, for instance, ask her. And she writes, the most frequent questions are three. If I believe in you, in God, if I forgive the evil, and if I hate my torturers. I think that it's very interesting, the second question. If I forgive. To the second, I explain that a Jew can forgive only for herself, but I am not able to forgive because I think about all those who were annihilated and who wouldn't forgive me. This is a great answer. Yes, I can go on. But it's too moving for me. So go on you.
Only to the last, I have a clear answer. So the third and last question was if I hate my torturers. Only to the last, I have a clear answer. Compassion, yes, towards anyone. Hatred, never. And therefore I'm saved, orphan and free, and for this I thank you. Hashem in the Bible, Adonai in prayer, God every day. The theme of hatred and forgiveness is very central. She says that even when she left Auschwitz, she did not hate anyone. She thought that hatred made her, turned her into a into a person she didn't want to be. And I think that really gives you the measure of the moral standards that she has imposed on herself and on anyone that she deals with in life. Edith is a very warm, wonderful woman, but she's very clear about what she likes, what she wants, and what she does not. And very demanding on herself, but also on others. And I think, yes, she cannot forgive for anybody else but herself, but she refused to also hate and to be in that position, which I think is also wonderful. And it's a literary device that she uses a lot in her books.
Can I ask you a question? Since you
please.
met her, when you wrote her, what did you write? I would like to meet you. I would like to translate. First time.
Yeah, at that time I was not thinking of translating her. I was writing a chapter of my thesis, of my PhD thesis, and I said, can I meet you and interview you? I wanted to interview her. And we clicked immediately. So every time then I went to Rome in the summer, we always saw each other. She tends to spend a lot of time in the house. She doesn't like to go out. Well, now, especially at her age. So I always go and make sure I visit her when I go. She has, she's very warm, but also she has this ability to really bring you into the world of her ideas. Whenever I go there, she likes to share, ideas of what she's going to write next. She makes sure that literature remains a central component of her life, always. I've known her for 20 years, and every time we go, we always only talk about literature, and not in an abstract way. She really feels it's important for her to express herself through ideas that then she uses in her book.
And what kind of writers does she like? Italian, American, French?
I think it's one of the questions I've asked her. Yeah, let me see. She mentioned American writers. That those are the ones. But not only Hemingway. And hang on a second. Here we go. No, it's not this. There we go. Yes. Okay. I said, who are the writers you admire and love reading? And she answers, it's better perhaps to read than to know some writers, which was not my case with her. But for me, the character and the human profile of a person are very important. I met all the great Italian writers. I loved the poet Eugenio Montale and the writer Vasco Pratolini, who became a friend. In writers, I mainly look for their human qualities. For me, they may have won all the Nobel Prizes of the world, but if they have no human value, I'm not interested in them. I also love American literature, Saul Bellow, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Henry Roth, Philip Roth, Ernest Hemingway. I knew Moravia well. I met Bassani. I just wrote a preface for an exhibit on Bassani, of whom I actually was not terribly fond. She was not terribly fond of Elsa Morante either. She was a difficult person, apparently. And Primo Levi, of course, a dear friend since the 1970s until his death. 2 days before he died, he called me. I was the one trying to console him, as if I were the older and not the younger among us. We saw each other often. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had a Fulbright in Italy many, many years ago, and the book Transit had just come out. Actually, one of the women who was in my translation workshop ended up translating the book.
Was it published? I'm not aware of that.
Transit.
In English? Is it published in English? I'm not aware. I know the book in Italian.
But again, from a small publisher, I'm sure, probably a small house. And anyway, it's a little bit different from the other books she's written, yeah?
Yeah. Well, she has, first of all, she has not, Transit still deals with her Holocaust. But she has not written just books about the Holocaust. She has also written, she tried, in fact, she complains a little bit. She wishes she were not thought as a Holocaust writer, but just as a writer. And that's her ambition as a writer. But of course, then Giornata della Memoria, we are here for that too, the International Remembrance Day. She is, called, interviewed, and asked to talk about it. She has written books like Transit, also that deal, making movies about the Holocaust, or that deal with the being in a house, what it means to be without a house, risking of having to leave your home. Edith Bruck has lived in the house she lives today for 30 years, and she's been renting. She doesn't own her apartment. And one of her fears when she was younger was that they would ask her to leave, that she would not be able to stay there. So that's part of that also topic that she talks about.
I also wanted to say that I'm a translator as well. And about 10 years ago, I got a grant to look at these books of testimonies by Italian survivors. And it's true that many of those books, some are translated, not widely distributed, but many of them are very kind of plodding. They have no literary, I mean, they have importance, but they don't have any literary, quality. But I really do see Bruck's work as different. And I think it's so, like you're saying, she's not in the canon. I don't understand why. I mean, I can see why she's not in the canon here as a translated Italian writer, but I don't understand how she would not be in Italy.
You know,
in Italy, we don't have actually one single canon. We have many different canons according to the ideological position, aesthetic position. There was a time when experimentalism was the main aspect of literature and a way of discriminating between good writers and bad ones. Since Edith Bruck doesn't have a sort of experimentalism in language, this is probably one of the reasons.
No, but like the Mondadori anthologies, there are a lot of writers in there who are very traditional, but she wasn't in that. And I'm going back.
It's interesting though that even Levi and Bassani came into the canon late.
But Bassani had a lot of problems because of his distance from the Gruppo 63, etc. For this obsession with language. She loves language, but in a way she's trying to simplify it in order to convey her poetic message. For many people, language was in those years the end of the work, not the tool. So it's an aesthetics that probably now it's gone, and so the canon is changing.
Absolutely true, and also she has been seen as not an Italian writer. That also, that is difficult to be included in an anthology of Italian writers when they still think of you as an Hungarian writer, naturalized Italian. That is changing, and you have other cases today. Gianpo Lahiri.
Yes, but I mean, we don't have Italian writers because Manzoni didn't know Italian at all. He spoke French and Milanese. Alfieri had to learn Italian. Svevo spoke German. And Saba sometimes wrote, I don't understand why Svevo, who could write a wonderful German, writes a terrible Italian. So we have a lot of people who decided to write Italian even if Italian was not their mother language. And this is very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. My guess again, even for Svevo, and Gianpo Lahiri, who is an American Pulitzer Prize winner, decided recently to write only in Italian. She moved to Italy, learned Italian. Now she only writes in Italian and then is translated into English by other people, which is a very, very interesting. But again, we've had more and more cases of writers who choose by choice. They write in Italian. And of course, in Italy, they're not always embraced as authentic writers of Italian literature. But things are changing, I think, and with Edith Bruck as well.
And finally, where can we find her? Does Rizzoli carry her book?
Yeah.
Yes, but in
You'll
this
find it
case,
everywhere.
it's La nave di Teseo. La nave di Teseo is a very prominent,
Yeah.
very interesting
Publisher.
publisher.
You can find
Uh,
them online. I
yes,
mean, these
online.
of course are Amazon, the devil, but bookstores, you'll find it.
Yes.
Yeah, you can order on the
Okay.
website of the publisher. It's very, yeah. No.
Okay, thank you very much, and
Thank
I
you very
hope
much.
to have again here, Gabriella, you for the book about the Jewish writers.
When I finish, I'll
Okay,
thank
even
you.
before.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone, for coming.